I want to run through some similarities and differences between the Canon 60D and the Canon 70D. Now, the first big difference is that the screen on the back on the 70D is a touch screen. So if we get that open and working, and it is the same touch screen that we see on the SL1, which is quite a nice touch screen. It gives you, in the menu system, a sensitivity control, standard or sensitive. I've never actually put it on sensitive, but I found it to be very responsive on standard. This is an excellent touch screen. Now, there was a lot of negativity about touchscreens when they was first rumored to be added to DSLRs, and I've really felt like most of that negativity is now gone as people realize how useful it is. It doesn't help, it's not helpful for all situations. At weddings, certainly. I shoot with my 5D Mark III, and I don't wish for a touchscreen because I know where the buttons are, I know what they do, and without removing my eye from the viewfinder, I can make changes to the settings of the camera. It's very quick, it's very painless. But there are times for more still life, scenic, live view, video, all of those, where having that touchscreen, having all of the controls right there in front of you and being able to gently change them without jiggling or moving the camera a whole lot can be very useful. Not to mention the touch to focus, which can be very, very nice. So I'm much more positive now about touchscreens on DSLRs than I used to be. I wouldn't mind a touchscreen on my 5D Mark III because I'm not always shooting weddings with it, and there are times where, again, that touch to focus is nice, or just being able to interact with the complete menu system is very fast, much more faster than navigating through one of these guys. Now let's look at this for just a second. On the 70D, they've shrunken it down just a little bit. This is kind of our rear wheel dial and our directional pad. You know, I don't love the way this feels, and when it's a little bit smaller, it's a little awkward, but you know, it does the job. I actually talked to somebody else who mentioned that they really loved it, so it's certainly somewhat of a personal preference, but it doesn't quite give me enough feedback on the directional pad to know that I'm really doing something unless I see the change happening there. And the fact that it's both a directional pad inside and on the outside, that little wheel, it throws me a little bit. Maybe it's something that I'll get more used to. We've had some button changes in locations, Q and playback over here, Q, playback's down here. These are all fairly minor. Menu and info have moved up here to the top left corner. Delete has moved down here. Your buttons across right here, your back button focus, your or autofocus start, your exposure lock, your focus point selection, those are all the same on both. Interestingly, on the 70D, the autofocus back button is turned on by default in all of your creative modes. That's your letter modes, which is quite nice. It is also, though, turned on for your front button, your shutter button. We can talk more about that in a second. Let's spend a few moments talking about the top of these two cameras. A lot of similarities, and in general, these two cameras feel very similar in the hand. The grip, the size, the weight, the texture, the material used, those are all basically identical. I hear that there are some minor styling differences, some minor size differences, but they're so minor that they're not readily apparent to the eye. So again, similar to a more pro camera, both of these cameras share this top LCD screen. This is nice for being able to quickly change settings without having to look at the back of the camera or have your eye up to the eye finder. And it just gives you a little bit more information about what's going on in the camera. The buttons across the top here, we'll talk more about in a second. They're very similar. The middle button has a little divot in it so that you can touch by feeling, know what button you're on, and know if you're working to the left, you're on drive and your autofocus, and if you're working to the right, you're on metering, and the little button that lights up the viewfinder up there. Now, a difference is up in front here, we now have the addition of this little autofocus select. We have our autofocus select here, but this gives us some sub options within the autofocus mode that we're in, and that is missing from the 60D. While we're looking at the top, we can talk about the dial a little bit. This dial is very similar to the T5i dial. This dial is very similar to the T4i and T3i dial. We have all of our kind of creative or our basic modes, they're called, and then including video. That's not a creative mode, but that's video there. And then we have our basic modes, the little pictures. Creative modes is what they call the letters. It's not very intuitive to me, but that's how they go at it. And including the C for custom. Now, over on the 70D, the dial now goes 360 degrees. Both of them are locking dials, so you have to press in the middle to get them to change. And the video is not on here, and several of the scenes are not on here because they are now hidden in the menu underneath Scene and Creative Auto. And I think for a more pro-level camera, that's appropriate. Honestly, very few of these actually do anything, or none of them do anything that you can't do on one of these modes with knowing a little bit of information. And so it's really, I think, wasted space for a lot of people. And under creative, so those are now wrapped up under the scene mode. Of course, we have our flash hot shoot and our pop-up flash. One thing that you can't see, but if we went into the menu system on the back would see is a difference. The 70D offers wireless connectivity. You can use a smartphone or tablet to fire this camera. You can use it to connect and download images as well, and or upload images through the system. So that is access through the Q menu if you want to. Over here, it is an electronic level, which you have available to you here as well, and we'll look at in a minute, but you do not, of course, have access to Wi-Fi. Looking at the sides of these two cameras, we have a lot of similarities. We have our mic in jack, HDMI output, our video or digital out, and remote hookup. They're exactly the same over here. They're just positioned differently under two little rubber doors, and we have our speaker there as well. And there is no headphone jack for real-time audio monitoring, lens release, flash pop-up, all very similar. Looking at the front of these two cameras, a lot of similarities here as well. In fact, basically you can call them identical. So looking at the front of these two cameras, they are basically identical. No real differences worth talking about. Looking at the side of these two cameras, the other side, again, no real differences worth talking about. Chrome colored camera strap, black colored camera strap. Seriously, that's about it. You can see that one of the little microphone ports of the stereo 70D mic is right there. That is not present on the 60D, it's just a mono mic. A single SD card slot on both of these cameras, and I haven't really mentioned the D7100 from Nikon, but that is a place where the D7100 definitely trumps this camera. Having dual card slots does give you some really nice flexibility and some peace of mind in more serious photography situations, like a wedding where you want to be creating backups almost as you're shooting, if you want to be ultra careful with your client's photography. Let's spend a few moments talking about the external features of the Canon 70D. Let's start in the top left corner with the menu button, which obviously will bring up the menu. When you are in one of the creative modes, that is the letters on the dial, you have all of the menu options. These menu options will change based on whether or not you're in still shooting mode or in video mode. And you now have additional options right there available to you. Now, if you are in photo mode, the info button will bring up this kind of standard information screen that at a glance allows you to see all of the options in the camera. Pressing the info button again brings up the electronic level, which can be useful to determine whether or not the camera is sitting level. As you saw, that was an option in the 60D right off of the Q screen. It's now a second press on the info button to launch that. We have our switch I already talked about that switches you from stills to video and starting and stopping, either starting and stopping live view and or starting and stopping recording actually onto the camera. Q will bring up that touch screen, and when you use that Q button there, all of these options are touch sensitive immediately. To back up out of that, you can get out of that. And now this is the Q screen, but nothing is touch sensitive until you either touch the Q button here or the Q button here. Playback, of course, will allow you to play back different clips that you have on the camera, stills or video, and pressing info will show you different information screens for those clips. Now, something that's interesting is you can navigate through these clips on the camera by using the dial up front or the dial on the back. The dial up front is customizable. You can have it jump 10 images at a time, as it's doing right now. You can have it only navigate through rated images, only through videos, or through certain folders. So you have some customizability there in how you navigate through your different images. The set dial down here, if you're in manual mode, controls your aperture. I don't have a lens on right now, so it's not going to allow me to do that. And it also allows you to navigate through the touchscreen if you don't want to touch the screen. And the set button will allow you to select those options there. Delete button down here will of course allow you to delete an image that's on playback, and pressing it again will delete, or pressing erase right there. The lock button I talked about will lock the aperture wheel right here and unlocking it there. Interestingly, the 70D comes with the autofocus back button turned on, AF on. As I said, the shutter button also will be autofocus. And so one of the nice things right here from the Q screen is the Customize Controls button. You can go in here and you can tell the shutter button to be only metering start, not to also autofocus. I've got a blog post about back button autofocusing, why it is really nice and I like it. And if you go back into that, you can go down to the next and say that the AF on button has a lot of different options, but the one that is default, which is both metering and autofocus, basically it does everything the shutter button does except take the picture, and I like to have the shutter button only take the picture and not refocus. And there are more customization options there. We can get into it in another video. We have our zoom in and zoom out when we're in playback. See how the blue matches to let you know that's the function when you're in playback. And up on top of it, it's a little bit harder to see, we have our exposure lock and our focus select button. Little diopter control here for people with vision correction or need vision correction. Read the manual on how that works. Right above the angled LCD, we have the autofocus button that allows you to move through the different autofocus screens, AI servo, one time, etc. Drive mode. The 70D has a variety of drive modes, including silent, higher speed silent, high speed, very high speed, which is your almost 7 frames per second, and there is a good amount of buffer in this camera. It's impressive. Your ISO can change. The 70D, as opposed to the T4i, T5i, does allow you to get to those intermediate ISOs, so you can be shooting at 640, 1250, 2000, on up. Your metering mode, and then a little light that turns on backlighting for this LCD panel. And then your sub-selection for your autofocus mode button is right here. And of course the shutter button up front. Nothing too exciting on the front of the Canon 70D. We have our Redeye reduction lamp. It also functions as the little light that blinks and lets you know when the self-timer is working. Why it can't also use that for focus assist, I don't know. That's something nice that the Nikon's does. Down here we have our little depth of field preview button, our infrared port for using the infrared remotes. Over here we have our flash pop-up and our lens release. I think I forgot to talk about the mode dial when the camera was laying on its back here when we were looking at the top. I mentioned it briefly in the conversation with the 60D versus the 70D, but one addition that I want to point out that this camera has, the T4i, T5i cameras don't, or early Rebels, is an addition of the custom dial. So you can set this camera up in a variety of different ways and then save that, or I should say you can set this camera up in a specific way, drive mode, autofocus, ISO, all of those things can then be saved and re-accessed by moving back to the custom mode on the dial. Again, this is a 360 dial. You can shoot video in any of these modes because of the video switch here and not being on the dial now. So one of the other big differences that I didn't talk about internally between this camera and the 60D, which we'll put back there somewhere, is the fact that this camera has the dual pixel technology on a new sensor, a 20 megapixel sensor. Now, it's not important to get hung up on the fact that it's 20 versus 18. but it is an improved sensor. It is doing better in low light. It is the best Canon APS-C sensor to date, but it isn't a huge or amazing improvement. And I think we always have to check our hopes and dreams at the door when we get these new product announcements, because they're never quite as big a step forward as we hope that they will be. I will be doing a side-by-side comparison with the D7100 right now. I will be doing a comparison with the D7100 soon and this camera, the 70D, and that's going to be very interesting to see. I suspect that the D7100 does still do a better job in low light. I was quite amazed when I reviewed that camera at how clean some of those high ISO images are. I have been impressed with this camera. It is a significant and noticeable improvement, but it isn't quite at the level of the D7100. So if you have any questions about the 70D, or the 60D, the D7100, you can leave a comment down below, or even better, come over and find me on Facebook. I do make an effort to answer all questions posted on Facebook, and a lot of YouTube comments just slip by. Sometimes there are too many for me to spend time answering. Thanks for watching.